As Donna said, we're going to record this part and then stop recording once I've done this quite quick presentation bit that kind of leads into this whole conversation about, let me just put that down there. How much more can we take on? Because this is, having done this role myself, and I'll introduce myself a bit more formally and then how I came about this, balancing up an increased workload versus that can lead to overload because we're not having an increase in working hours and also in hiring freezes as well. So there's no increase in working hours because obviously we can't work more than 7 hours a day. And there's a lot of companies have a hiring freeze as well. So there's no increase in personnel. So how do we then deal with the increased workload, which can come about from increased submissions, which is good. We want more submissions. And that can lead to overload. It can lead to feelings of stress because you're thinking that's just the workload is just overwhelming. How can I deal with that? It can impact health, physical and mental well-being because the amount of the work that's coming about, potential burnout as well, and also increased turnaround times. Can you see that? I'll just move that over there a bit. So I'll just give a bit of background on today's session as well as myself before we go into the session itself. And I've just got a few slides to go through that you can see on screen rather than trying to imagine stuff. So for myself, I've been in journal administration and managing the peer review process for nearly 19 years a little later this month, initially as editorial assistant and now as peer review group manager for Cambridge University Press and assessment. What does that mean? I manage 3 units, so starting in the middle, the peer review administration team, which is 7-strong team of journal administrators, so editorial assistants, assistant editors, managing editors and such like, who handle 30 journals across 3 online peer review systems platforms. And we've got some submission statistics on the screen. Whenever I quote original submissions, it just gives a flavour of the work that that editorial offices do, because there's any number of revised versions, there's pre and post submission, there's any amount of queries that don't link into an original submission, there's board meetings, board rotations, etc. And also the big task of duplicate database maintenance of duplicate accounts. The second unit is the online peer review systems services unit, those who a 3-strong team of system specialists who build, configure and maintain the submission systems that we use. We use ScholarOne, Editorial Manager, EditFlow, EJPress and a few other non-standard systems, as well as non-submission platform processes, so journals that are not on a submission platform. And then a third unit of freelance contingent and agency administrators who provide similar service that the PRA team does, and they handle 43 journals, the external administrators. I'm also a trained disability and neurodiversity ambassador for Cambridge University Press and Assessment, a special interest design physically disabled, and how to be disability confident work, ensuring diversity inclusivity includes accessibility. And I've worked in various physical capacities, starting off purely on-site, then mixed hybrid, then permanently remote, then of course permanently remote during the lockdown, and will remain permanently remote for my own health needs. I currently line manage 11 line reports, soon to be 12, based across the US, the UK and India as well. So today's session's theme, as we push for more content, invited submissions, supplemental, special issues, etc. And don't get me wrong, we want more content submitted. However, this means more work for editorial offices, but often no increase in staffing with hiring or headcount freezes, and also no increase in working hours to offset this growth in workload. So how do we make the time? How do we find the time to deal with increased workload? Before we get into this, just humour me for just a few minutes. I want to take a look back at where peer review first started, how it has evolved from the earliest concept, and then leading to what we can do. As you will see, technology and practices have come a long way. So I have a few slides as we look into, see it into it, you can kind of read that. The unsurprising history of peer review. Unsurprising because it didn't really surprise me, but it was nice to see where it started from. So I won't go into these into too much detail, and I kind of took design when I tried to make this look like papyrus paper with that kind of writing. So I just did this a little bit before for another presentation I gave. So peer review has been around with evidence as early as Copernicus in the 16th century and Galileo in the 17th century, with their work undergoing the earliest form of peer review. And their works were banned at the time, kind of like being rejected. I won't read out all of this. So Copernicus's work was banned by the Catholic Church because it theorized the Earth revolved around the sun, whilst the Church considered the Earth to be geocentric. Similarly, Galileo was also banned by the Catholic Church for the same theory, that the Copernican system, that the Earth and the other planets revolved around the sun, rather than the Ptolemaic system, geocentricity. Other writers and theologians didn't fare as well either, and they fared worse actually, as Michael Servetus, a 16th century theologian, was burnt at the stake on top of a pyre of his own books, no less. It's like mean, for heresy against the Catholic Church in France for his theory pulmonary circulation. Now, I can't imagine we do that to authors submitting manuscripts now that we'd reject. We just send them a polite rejection letter of why we're going to reject their manuscript, or why we've rejected their manuscript, rather than considering to burn them at the stake on top of a pyre of their own books. That's just kind of mean. Then this is more about Cambridge University Press and the evolution of that, being the oldest publication house in the world, first published in 1584, the two treatises of the Lord His Holy Supper by Yves Rospeau and John de Lespine. And I won't go through all of this, but I can share these slides afterwards. And that kind of set up Cambridge University Press as it was, and now merged into assessment, which I haven't actually added onto this slide. Then the earliest form of structured peer review. Informal debates gave rise to formal institutions such as royal societies. The first peer review volume of work came from the Royal Society of Edinburgh, with the editor distributing the submitted essay for review to individuals he considered to be well versed in these matters. And that to me sounds like modern day peer review, just without the technology of today. Similarly, other societies also sent out their received books out to members of their council for their reviewer reports. William Wewell, hopefully I pronounce his name right, noted that all submissions to the Royal Society of London should undergo peer review, as these reports were often more interesting than the memoirs themselves and could be used to popularize science, something akin to social media today, I suppose. So that was peer review, the very earliest forms. Then we moved on to blinding, or anonymization rather, where the book's research articles were not subject to any form of anonymization, with authors openly sending their works to members of society and reviewers for their response and input. And I'll put an example of Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace, the latter sharing his manuscript on natural selection with Darwin, but for myself, I hadn't actually heard of Alfred Russel Wallace without Googling him beforehand. Then there was the introduction of editorial boards. So similar to what we're going to be talking about in a few minutes, there was an increase in submissions because now journals or organizations or societies were open to submissions, but they're having to deal with that number of submissions that were coming in. So to support editors with the content of publishing, JAMA used in-house review almost exclusively in the 1930s. Of course, we know with increased submissions and interest in scientific and knowledge, exploration, comes an increase in workload, and editorial boards being primarily used as peer reviewers themselves. Thus, independent peer reviewers, as we know, were born from the 1940s onwards. And then, so now we have the peer review process where manuscripts were, or submissions were sent out to someone to peer review. Then we had the evolution of peer reviewing systems. So of course, without the systems that we have today in technology, they started with handwritten letters, secret ballots, committee meetings, etc., moving on to post, fax, and then the earliest form of peer review systems. I focused on ScholarOne here, but of course we use other systems as well. The first one I came across was PaperPath. This was to track scholarly manuscripts in peer review journals. That was used in 1996. Of course, we still had fax and post. It was commonly used in the 90s. I've experienced both of these myself in peer review administration capacity, trying to decipher a peer reviewer's handwriting, and a faxed article is quite hard. And Manuscript Central was a predecessor to ScholarOne that was first created in 1999, and ScholarOne, as we know today, was patented in February 2000 by William T. Carden Jr. Of course, we have other online peer review system platforms that we use as well, not just ScholarOne. So we have the peer review process now set up. We have the actual editorial board, the reviewers, the online peer review systems that we use. And then, of course, that doesn't mean that it's going to stop. It might not move as quickly, or well, I suppose not as quickly since the 1500s. But that means that taking advantage of the technological changes now to our advantage to deal with the increased workload, or even the sustained workload that continues as we continue with journal submissions. And I've got a few references there. So what's next? So what do we do now? Press a button to make it work. Further tweaking of the systems, looking holistically and objectively at the processes. Just because it's been done in the past, do we need to do them now? As you can see through that really quick introduction into how peer review has developed and changed and evolved over the years, just because something was done a few years ago, a year ago, it might not serve the purpose now. And that's certainly what I found when I first started in peer review management. Cutting out the unnecessary, looking at, and we'll discuss these in more detail, looking at why do we do that in that way? How does it then affect the next person that sees it, or the end user? Are we filling out, are we ticking a checkbox just because it was there in the first place when the system was set up? Are we wasting our time doing that particular checkbox? Moving tasks to where and when they actually matter in the process. And for example, again, we'll go into this in a bit more detail, but for example, using plagiarism software checks, rather than, for the journal that I used to work on, rather than having it the initial submission check, moving it to at least the revision stage where it's going to actually, dare I say, matter, because that version is more likely to be accepted than the original submissions that we have, because as you know, not all original submissions move on to revision or even then accept. So that was not the end, there's one more. So where to start? And this will lead into the conversation that we have today. Looking at, and this is where I came about it from, and again, we will go into more detail of where to start. So whose responsibility is it to do that particular task? Is it the editor? Is it the EIC, the publisher or in-house editor? Is it the journal administrator? And for today's session, I'll be using journal administrator for editorial offices, so be it editorial assistant, managing editor, journal administrator, just using that particular term. Bulky or repeat tasks, making good use of automation, because technology has come about now. AI tools, which we'll come into in more detail as well, because technology has changed to help us in a good way. And yes, AI tools still need a human to interpret the results at the end, but they can be used to do something to highlight to a journal administrator, this, and this needs to be done. But then that initial check, that initial checking itself doesn't have to be done by the journal administrator, only the follow-up of what then needs to be done. Time-consuming or detailed tasks. So, for example, inviting of reviewers. This is quite a specific example. If, in my experience, if an editor is selecting reviewers and the only thing a journal administrator, might not be the case for every journal, the only thing a journal administrator does is press a button to then invite those reviewers that the editor has put in order of selection, then why is it down to the journal administrator, especially if the email template is addressed from the editor, not the journal administrator? They're not changing the invitation. Therefore, for want of a better word, they're just ticking a button, they're just clicking a button. And I did ask the PRA team how many journals that they have where the editors are inviting the reviewers themselves. And it's actually quite normal that editors invite the reviewers because they've selected them. So something like that, where it might not be within the role of the, or it might be in the role of the journal administrator, just why is it, I guess. So to question the processes, to question not staffing changes, not question staffing changes, but when there is staffing changes, why are we doing this in the way that that was done when the previous journal administrator did it? Or if there's no, if the journal administrator is the same, then yes, that process was great when we set up the journal, or it was great for the purpose then, but now it's time consuming now. So why do we have that? An example of that is in the production checklist that I used to do, we had 3 tick boxes, which were just asking, like, is there a PDF proof? Has it been anonymized? Are all the files included? And after doing so many manuscripts sent through to production, I asked production, do you do anything with this information that I'm ticking? They said no. And it took me about 2 minutes, well, not even that, a minute per set of 3 tick boxes, but times that, it's cumulative, isn't it? So times that by how many manuscripts you're then sending to production, or even initial submission checks, that's a lot of minutes spent on ticking a box that no one needs to then see, apart from yourself as a reminder. But once you're used to doing that, you no longer then need to tick that box. So I got those 3 boxes removed because there was no point me spending 1 minute of my life on every single manuscript that we were either accepting or even initial submission checks, ticking this box, and that saved a lot of time. So it's rather than, because we don't have any, because a lot of organizations have a hiring freeze, and as I said at the start, there's no increase in working hours. We have to find the time by either moving things away to the person it should be with, using automation, questioning the process. There's lots of things to do, and that's then can cumulatively add to increasing time that's available, I guess. And a lot of the changes that we did, we backed up with data. So, so not just to say, I want to change this because it'd be good for me. It's more, we'd like to change this because reviewers don't need 4 weeks to review. They only need 2, or however long they actually need. It might be longer or shorter for other journals. What are the bottlenecks? And make changes to backed up with data, and then that can really help. And then stream it back over notifications, reminder schedules. When I first started on the journal, there was notifications when new submissions were submitted. It depends on how many journals a person works on, of course. I was working on just the one, but it was about 1,500 original submissions a year, quite full on as well, with every step having to be done by the journal administrator. But I didn't need to have an email come in where there was a new manuscript submitted. Some journals do, because they're smaller and might need that notification, but other journals, it's just another thing to delete. And okay, it might take 5 seconds maximum to delete an email that comes in, but times that by how many manuscripts that are then submitted, that's a lot of seconds that could be saved. So I think that was everything on the presentation. No, it wasn't. The final one was then to phase in the changes. Don't do it all at once. That's not going to work. And also people on the receiving end are going to think, what, this was going lovely and smoothly, and now you've decided to move things around all at once. No. What we're doing at the moment is phasing in a number of changes, and also to see if it works. Because if you change everything at once and none of it works, that's a lot of stuff to put back. But if it's phased or piloted even, then you can see, okay, it's improved things. And the thing that we're trying to improve is finding time to then deal with the increased workload that comes about. So I think, yep, that is the end of my presentation. So I'll stop sharing now. I know that was a lot of information.